So this morning, Los Angeles police are looking for suspects after a Korean-American man, an Air Force veteran, says he was attacked, look at that, called racial slurs linked to coronavirus. Police are investigating this as a hate crime. And in New York, there are growing calls for hate crime charges to be filed after a 36-year-old Asian-American man was stabbed in the back in Chinatown. This, as the NYPD says, attacks on Asian Americans have jumped 1,900% in the last year amid racist conspiracies about the pandemic. And according to one group, an Asian activist group, more than 3,000 hate crime incidents were reported last year alone. The year before, only 4 were reported. Shan Wu has written extensively about this. He's our legal analyst and joins me now. Shan, I'm so glad you could come on the show. Your op-ed was very powerful and meaningful on this. On top of everything that I just mentioned, you've now got the NBA investigating Jeremy Lin, saying that he was playing on the court and he was called coronavirus. You say there's a failure of law enforcement and the criminal justice system overall to protect Asian Americans. What is the biggest failure you're seeing right now?
I think the biggest failure is while there has been some reporting and we can see the uptick in the incidents being reported, which is good, I think that there's still a reluctance on the part of prosecutors to actually charge the hate crimes. That terrible murder in San Francisco of the elderly man who was pushed over and died, that still has not yet been charged as a hate crime. And that's something that we have to be worried about. So,
can we talk specifically about that case? Because you're talking about an 84-year-old, and his name is Vichar Redangappi. He was attacked on January the 28th. He was slammed to the ground in San Francisco by a 19-year-old. So state prosecutors have decided to charge that 19-year-old with murder and elder abuse, but not charge it as a hate crime. I mean, he died after being slammed to the ground. Are you saying you're seeing a reluctance among prosecutors to go that next step and prosecute these as hate crimes?
Yes, the statistics are hard to come by, Poppy, because the hate crime statistics are pretty complicated. They tend to capture the classification of the crime, not necessarily which instance got prosecuted. So it's kind of hard to delve into that. Subjectively, when I was a young prosecutor, in my 11 years as a federal prosecutor, I don't recall bringing a single hate crime charge. There had been one time I wanted to, and I was dissuaded because I was told, and I think this is a popular reason for not doing it, that it adds an extra burden of proof, and prosecutors, frankly, don't want that extra burden of proof. They're concerned with securing the underlying conviction.
Wow. You know, you write to that effect. Just because the criminal justice system has fallen short in the past doesn't mean it needs to do so in the present or the future. And this is personal for you. It's beyond, your former role and your legal expertise. You faced bullying and assault growing up. You have daughters, and you've talked to them about your fear for your 2 daughters. Are you confident this moment and this tragic surge changes anything?
Well, I'm hopeful, Poppy. I'm not confident. Unfortunately, historically in our country, people of color have been the victims of violence, and that has been very under-prosecuted. I mean, there were massacres of Chinese in the 1800s. Even in the 1980s, the terrible Vincent Chin murder, those defendants ultimately essentially got a slap on the wrist even after federal civil rights charges were brought. So I'm hopeful there's more consciousness raised now, but the strain of not knowing where the attack or harassment may come from is very wearing. I think you're hearing that from the Asian American community.
The UN put out a report in August, and they talked about anti-Asian hate crimes rising at an alarming rate. We saw President Biden sign an executive order condemning intolerance against Asian Americans when he took office. And Andrew Yang, who ran for president, who's now running for mayor of New York City this weekend, called for more funding to hate crimes task forces. And he talked about how a lot of these crimes actually go completely unreported. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes, that's a really important point, Poppy. With a lot of these communities, particularly immigrant communities, and even other people of color communities, minorities, there is a reluctance to interact with law enforcement, particularly folks from other countries may have had bad experience with oppressive police forces. So one thing that's really important to do is to do this community reach out to educate people so they know how to report the crimes, because without people coming together and reporting them, there's no case for the police or prosecutors to bring.
Yeah. Shan, thank you for being here, and thank you for what you wrote on CNN.com. It's really important. We appreciate it.
You're welcome, Poppy.
Okay.